The death toll from the coronavirus in Australia continues to climb. New South Wales health authorities have confirmed a 9th fatality, bringing the national toll to 20. Globally, the death toll has surged past 40,000. Half of those are in Spain and Italy alone. And the number of confirmed cases in the US continues to skyrocket, likely to hit 200,000 in the next 24 hours. OK, so let's take a look through the major developments this morning. A 95-year-old woman who was a resident at the Dorothy Henderson Lodge aged care facility in Sydney's northwest died yesterday. There have been a number of cases from that aged care facility. There are, as I mentioned, 150 new coronavirus infections in New South Wales reported or announced today, taking the state's total to to around 2,200. Several new cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in South Australia, linked to Adelaide Airport. The new cases are traced to 6 Qantas baggage handlers from the airport who've tested positive to COVID-19. Yesterday, a Qantas flight headed for Adelaide had to turn back to Sydney because of the airport cluster. The death toll in the US has passed through 3,400, so a higher death toll in China now. There are more than 175,000 cases in the US, almost half of those in New York. About 3 out of 4 Americans is now about to be under or about to be under some form of lockdown. Spain continues to be devastated by the pandemic, recording its highest daily death toll of nearly 850, while the UK experienced a sharp rise with 381 people dying, up from 180 the previous day. The figures include a 19-year-old who had no underlying health conditions. Farmers and food exporters are the latest to be given a coronavirus lifeline, with the government set to sponsor cargo flights to key international destinations. The $110 million export package will help safeguard fresh food exports, and the planes will return carrying medical supplies. And the Australian government has called for the global economy to be put in a so-called controlled hibernation during the coronavirus pandemic. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has told G20 finance ministers the global economy should be temporarily mothballed to minimise job losses and keep businesses going. So let's take a look at key elements there in a bit more detail. Health authorities in New South Wales have confirmed a 9th coronavirus death in the state. Reporter Jessie Dorset joins us now from Sydney. Jessie, what can you tell us about this latest death?
Yeah, Joe, officials this morning have confirmed that a 95-year-old woman who was living at the Dorothy Henderson Lodge in Sydney's Macquarie Park died yesterday. Joe, she's the 5th resident from that aged care facility to die from coronavirus, the 9th in New South Wales and the 20th in Australia. New South Wales still has about half of the overall cases in Australia. 2,182 people in New South Wales have COVID-19. That's an increase of 150 overnight. Here's the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian.
Do not look at the number of cases and whether they're up or down on a day, because it doesn't take long, it doesn't take much for things to get out of control. At this stage, we are still to an extent controlling the spread, containing the spread, but we know we can't do that forever because this virus is virulent. It spreads really, really quickly and very unfortunately too effectively. And therefore we have to maintain our vigilance. We can't let our foot off the pedal. We can't relax. And I know that's a difficult thing to say when so many families now are struggling with the new arrangements and adjusting their own lives, and we're grateful for that.
New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian speaking there a short time ago. And Jessie, what are authorities having to say about this possible cluster around Bondi?
Yeah, well, officials believe that backpackers are spreading the coronavirus. There's obviously a lot of backpackers that are residing around Bondi. The beach itself has been shut for a few days, but the lifeguards remain. This morning, instead of watching the surf, they're guarding the beach, making sure no one comes onto the sand, and they're carving out the words stay home. That's their message. Of course, there are legitimate reasons for people to leave their homes as allowed by authorities. We've seen hundreds of people on the promenade this morning exercising, walking, jogging. That's one of the reasons they are allowed to come out, although the council officers have been down here saying they need to keep 150 metres distance between themselves and other people.
Meters.
Of course, there are 1.5 metres. My apologies, Joe. That would be an incredible distance. 1.5 metres distance. Some of the other reasons: shopping for essentials, going to work or to educational facilities if you can't do that from home, and compassionate reasons. But we've been speaking to a few locals who have been down here this morning, respecting the rules, and they say not everyone has been doing the right thing.
I've been coming to Bondi really all my life for an early morning swim, like my father did before me till he was 88.
And how do you feel seeing the beach empty like this?
Sad. And it's quite depressing in a way, because for the early morning swimmers, it was somewhere it was really enjoyable. We were on our own, virtually in the water, come out, and it was like a lifeblood really, and now we can't do that. And it's disappointing that I understand on those hot days when the crowds came, that they sort of wrecked it for the rest of us. So that's disappointing.
There's a mixed feeling at the same time. Well, I find it quite amazing to be able to walk and just admire how beautiful it is without anyone. And I was so lucky to be living in this environment. And at the same time, I find it's really hard with a young baby or for ourselves not to be able to enjoy it. But I really understand why the government have decided to do it, and I just try to follow the rules.
To try and find the uncovered cases here around Bondi and the Waverley area, Joe, the health authorities are going to be setting up a new testing clinic at the Bondi Pavilion. They expect to test about 200 people a day, and they say anyone who is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 in the area can come and get tested.
They get a few more people knocking on their door than 200. We'll see. OK, Jessie Dorset reporting there from Bondi and Sydney. I think it's important just to point out in terms of that stay home message, there are valid reasons for people to go out, obviously, to get food, and authorities have said it is fine to exercise outside alone or with a personal trainer. That's the rule in New South Wales. It varies from state to state. If you want to get the details for your particular state or territory, the WhatsApp chat is really good that the federal government has set up. Just important to note that there are situations, obviously, where it is okay to be outside, but stay home as much as possible. Now, several new cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in South Australia, linked to Qantas baggage handlers from Adelaide Airport. Reporter Shubha Krishnan joins us now from Adelaide. Shubha, g'day. So what can you tell us about these latest cases?
Joe, unfortunately there's not that much detail, but South Australia's Chief Public Health Officer, Nicola Spurrier, was just on ABC local radio here in Adelaide, and that's when she revealed there had been several new coronavirus cases overnight, and they were linked to the Qantas baggage handlers at Adelaide Airport. As I said, she couldn't confirm just how many new cases there were or how they were linked, but this all stems, of course, from the announcement yesterday by SA Health that there had been 6 Qantas baggage handlers who tested positive for COVID-19. That had a number of repercussions yesterday. 7 Qantas flights were cancelled, including 1 flight from Sydney, which had to be turned around mid-air. There's also a number of repercussions for Qantas staff. There are up to 100 workers, ground staff and baggage handlers at Qantas who have been impacted and who may need to now self-quarantine for 14 days. Now, the airline has stepped up its cleaning measures and did a thorough clean yesterday, and now it's working with SA Health to determine just how many people may be impacted and where this cluster of cases may have stemmed from.
Yeah. And Shubha, is there any advice from health authorities for passengers travelling through Adelaide Airport?
So SA Health has said that anyone who may have been travelling through Adelaide Airport since Monday, who may have since developed symptoms, they're asking those people to get tested urgently. They say that it is low risk that the virus could be transmitted through the actual luggage itself. Nicola Spiria, the Chief Public Health Officer, said that on radio this morning. But just as a precaution, they're asking people to wipe down their luggage, especially the handles of their suitcases.
OK, Shubha Krishnan reporting there from Adelaide. Australian farmers and fishers have been thrown a lifeline with the federal government announcing an exporter support package. Under the plan, flights will be organised to ship produce to other countries, while talks are underway about getting more Australians stranded overseas back home as well. Political reporter Stephanie Boris joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Steph, g'day. So Australian producers will soon be sending their goods overseas again. We heard, I know Madeline Morris, one of the News Breakfast presenters, went down to one of those spots, I think it was on the South Australian-Victorian border, where I think they were crayfish exporters and their business had basically ground to a halt. So is this specifically designed for people like that?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. Seafood exporters are set to benefit massively from today's government announcement because essentially it's all but impossible at the moment for exporters to send their goods overseas because of all the changes that we've seen around flights in response to coronavirus. In fact, 90% of Australian air freight actually goes in passenger aircraft, hence why there's been such a massive drop in exports being able to go overseas. So this government package announced today is the government facilitating flights for Australian exporters, specifically, as you mentioned there, seafood and also other products such as red meat and dairy products. The flights will be heading to a number of countries. They include China, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore and the UAE. And while they'll be going over full of produce, some of those flights will actually be coming back with items too, specifically medical supplies, pharmaceutical goods, because as we've heard, there are a shortage of different types of products as a result of coronavirus. Now, this support package being announced today is worth $110 million, and the Tourism and Trade Minister Simon Birmingham says it's essential to keep some of our businesses open.
It's crucial for the long term that our farmers, our fishers are able to continue to get their product into market, because if they don't, then there is the risk that they will be replaced by others. We're seeing now a growth in demand in marketplaces such as China, and we want to make sure that where we can keep the Australian economy going, we firmly do.
And Steph, what's happening with the effort to get Australians back home from overseas?
Well, there are still a number of Australians stranded overseas, both on cruise ships and particularly in South America. A number of people are having issues getting out of there due to restrictions being placed, essentially movement lockdowns to try and stop the spread of coronavirus. So we know that over the weekend, an Australian travel company managed to get a plane into Peru and get about 260 Australians home. In the next 24 hours, we're hoping a plane will get into Uruguay and bring Australians home. But the question is obviously what next, because there are still many Australians overseas. The Smart Traveller Twitter site this morning is suggesting that Australians should look at United Airlines and also flights through Qatar Airways that will go via Doha. They're two options for Australians, if of course they can even get to the airport. But the Foreign Minister Marise Payne this morning on AM has confirmed that the federal government is now working with Qantas about whether it can get some flights into South America, specifically Peru, and bring Aussies home.
We are continuing to work with Qantas on further flights to assist Australians who are still there, and also trying to facilitate internal travel for Australians who are in more remote and isolated parts of Peru to come to the city centres, to come to Lima, to Cusco, so that they are able to access those flights. I expect to have more information from my department, from Qantas, on those in the coming days.
And Steph, the experts have made it clear that we can't really expect a vaccine for coronavirus until at least 12 to 18 months. But we've got the regular flu season starting now as well. What are authorities saying about getting a vaccine for the regular flu season?
Well, the Australian medical experts are urging all Australians to get the flu vaccine for this season. And while, of course, it doesn't protect you against coronavirus, it will potentially stop you from getting the flu. And there is great concern about what would happen to Australians if they contract both coronavirus and the flu. We've seen overseas in Europe some very terrible ramifications as a result of that. So here in Australia, Aussies are being urged to get the vaccine to not only stop getting the flu, it also means then hopefully you don't end up in hospital, which means beds are still available to those that contract coronavirus and need urgent medical care. Now, in a worst case scenario, with a flu season alone, up to 1,000 people could pass away, and that's just from the flu. So real urgency for people to get the vaccine this year. The medical authorities are saying you don't have to rush out and get it today, but to work on getting a vaccine appointment over the next month or so. A number of people can get this vaccine for free, including pregnant women, people aged 65 and over, and if you've got a severe medical condition. But of course, it's best to call your GP and have a chat to them about what is advised for you.
Okay, Stephanie Boris reporting there from Canberra. Now, I might just mention that we expect the Tasmanian Premier Peter Gutwein to step up around this time. He's been holding a media conference around this time each day. There have been 2 deaths in Tasmania over the last couple of days, and some strong messages from Peter Gutwein about what needs to be done there in Tassie. So I'll bring you that media conference or elements of it soon. The United States has overtaken China in the number of declared deaths from coronavirus. Johns Hopkins University data shows over 3,400 people have died in the US and more than 180,000 have been infected. US President Donald Trump says Americans must make sacrifices to control the spread.
We're at war with a deadly virus. Success in this fight will require the full, absolute measure of our collective strength, love, and devotion. Very important. Each of us has the power, through our own choices and actions, to save American lives and rescue the most vulnerable among us. That's why we really have to do what we all know is right. Every citizen is being called upon to make sacrifices. Every business is being asked to fulfill its patriotic duty. Every community is making fundamental changes to how we live, work, and interact each and every day. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this going on long into the future when this virus is gone and defeated. Some of the things we're doing now will be very good practice for the future, including for not getting the flu, which is very devastating also.
US President Donald Trump speaking there a short time ago, and we'll be having a chat to an expert in the US who's actually of Italian heritage as well. It'll be really interesting to talk to Ilaria Capua in about 15 minutes' time. And there's another grim coronavirus milestone for Spain. The country has recorded its highest daily death toll of 849 fatalities. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
The images out of Spain are absolutely appalling. In Madrid today, there was pictures of graves being dug, the rain falling, burials in their hundreds, and it just doesn't seem to get better. And even though health authorities there are saying that the infection rate is going down, there was 9,000 new infections in the last 24 hours, so the figures don't suggest it. I guess the Spanish people can only hope that these weeks of isolation, they're in their 3rd week, of course, of this shutdown in Spain, and it is a shutdown in Spain because really it's very, very strict there, is actually working. But again, this another record in the death toll there. Elsewhere, records have been set as well, of course, in France today. Also a record death toll there of 418 deaths, and in the UK too, 381 deaths here. Although health officials here have said since the lockdown began here, since those measures were put in place, that the infection rate is now slowing. So they are seeing evidence that is happening, and they say that is a good sign, but of course nobody is out of the woods yet. People are making a difference, they're staying at home, but this is not the end of it. Italy again today in the last 24 hours recorded a death toll up in the 800s, that's 800s, so this is a huge figure, but of course it's a lagging figure, so the figure that really matters, I suppose, is that infection rate, and when that starts to go down, that is when health officials start to get more positive, and that we are now seeing is happening in Italy.
Now, Greece has reported its first case of coronavirus among thousands of migrants in overcrowded camps in the country. The case was a refugee mother who recently gave birth in an Athens hospital. She'd been staying in a camp about an hour north of the capital, which houses more than 2,000 people. Authorities say they're attempting to trace where the woman had become infected and who she came into contact with. Indonesian President Joko Widodo has declared a national public health emergency amid warnings the nation could face more than 140,000 deaths within a month from COVID-19. The figures are detailed in a report to the government by medical experts at the University of Indonesia. Here's Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker.
As the number of cases rises exponentially in Indonesia, it's not only hospitals that are struggling to deal with the dead. This family in Sulawesi lost their daughter from acute pneumonia, a likely victim of coronavirus. The hospital had wrapped her body in plastic in accordance with protocols set out by the World Health Organization. But her family insisted on removing the shroud to prepare the body for burial. They refused to let an ambulance take her away in a casket. Health authorities have now issued stricter guidelines on burial procedures to minimise the chance of contagion. The Indonesian government is also flagging tougher measures to restrict the movement of people between regions.
I ask for the large-scale policy of physical distancing to be firmer and more disciplined. To be more effective, I asked earlier for it to be guided by civil emergency policy.
But there's no firm detail on how far the measures will go, and the president has been reluctant to embrace the need for a full lockdown in the capital, Jakarta. Medical experts warn Indonesia faces a huge death toll if it fails to impose tougher measures to curb the spread of the virus. A report prepared for the government estimates that under current restrictions there could still be 144,000 deaths by the end of next month. Tougher measures to enforce social distancing could save nearly 100,000 lives, while extreme restrictions, including a lockdown, would reduce the death toll further to about 12,000. The government has left it to individual provinces and cities to impose their own lockdowns. But with Jakarta worst hit by coronavirus and work for many in the capital drying up, there's a growing exodus of people leaving for their hometowns. And there's a real fear they'll only hasten the spread of the virus across the huge archipelago.
Anne Barker reporting there from Indonesia. An Indian local has helped guide stranded tourists to a hostel in Delhi. It comes as the Indian government launches a campaign to help tourists with the nation a week into its 3-week lockdown. Here's South Asia correspondent James Oaten in Delhi.
A lot of tourists I've spoken with say community anxiety in India suddenly escalated once the country started to introduce lockdowns as a way to battle the spread of coronavirus. Some found locals weren't too happy having an outsider in their neighbourhood. Others say hotels started to flat out refuse to accommodate them anymore. But there are, of course, Indians going above and beyond to help foreign tourists.
These are my friends here, chilling in the open area.
That's Shubham Dalamskar too, and this is the hostel he found for around a dozen stranded tourists he met on the way from Jaisalmer to Delhi.
Suddenly I saw a lot of local people coming to them and telling them, screaming Corona on their face. And the whole situation was getting out of the hands. I felt bad as an Indian that this is happening in India where, we love guests and we are famous for hospitality. So I decided I should do something for this.
He could be staying in Delhi with his family, but he's sticking it out in the hostel with his new mates. Shubham put his number on social media, encouraging any stranded tourist to call.
And within one day, this whole thing got viral. And from that day, it's been almost like 10 days, and I'm getting over 100 calls and almost like 500 messages every day.
He's helped tourists across India find accommodation and food. He's even paid for their expenses if they're struggling. One tourist he's helped is Australian Stuart Dufty.
Even friends here are reluctant to take me in, and some of them is because they think I've got corona, which I've known them like 20 years. But for others, it's basically they just feel like they don't want to like rock the boat with their neighbours by bringing in a foreigner.
Stories of tourists falling on tough times prompted the Indian government to launch a website, strandedinIndia.com. It says it's a portal for tourists to find all sorts of valuable information and phone numbers, no matter where they're stuck.